Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today on this Saturday as we visit artist Joe Ivacic in his home and studio and learn more about him and his career. So thank you for joining me. I'm going to go into a little bit of what's going on and share my screen right now. So thank you, Joe, for being here. We're going to say hello in a second. As many of you know, the Glass Art Fair is online at glassartfair.com. It's our second year of this exhibition, sharing the artwork of the artists that many of us know and love and beyond. It's artwork from artists from around the world, and many of the pieces have a lot of attention already. We've sold some of them, but definitely have a chance. Please take a chance to check it out. I will be up for a couple months, and it correlates with our event happening here in Detroit, which is our 50th, which you're invited to. That I think we're pretty filled up, but you never know. You can always get a hold of Debbie and see if there's room left. If you RSVP and participate, you have a chance of winning that Peter Horror piece I'm virtually holding there. I kind of photoshopped that in, but you get the idea. So I hope to see you. The Masterworks auction is online. Make sure to check that out. 44 pieces up and available. And so we have a good collection of artists coming in and clients for the 50th. So hope to see you there. Steve Lynn is having an exhibition at the same time at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He's probably there right now or traveling there to set up like 16 pieces or something wild like that. And on top of that, Latches Arboyas show is still up on display there. Just had some clients visit the museum and he called me and emailed me and told me they were very impressed, and that's a great place to go. So this 12-month exhibition, it continues focusing on artworks that are not in Grandma's collection yet. We will be selecting artists soon for 2022, and we're going to be awarding the first 4 winners in December, and they get to participate the next year again with another presentation. So I want to thank Joe for being here today, and I'm going to go ahead and take off my screen, and we're honored to have you in our family. And Joe, I'll have you start sharing. So let me enable that, and you could take over.
Let's see.
While you're doing that, feel free to say hi.
Hi, everybody.
Perfect.
And let's see. It is which screen? This one.
Yep.
That button.
You got it. Well, welcome.
Thank you. The show is titled Coming Together. I'm going to be talking about 2 different bodies of work, one that you have privately seen, and then one that we're going to be introducing at this show. So I'm really excited about it, and hopefully the nerves don't show. So first, I'd like to start by thanking everybody for being here. I want to thank the artists that have shown with the NGG before, and then I also like to thank the viewers, collectors, and students that are investing their time on their weekend right now with us. Thank you to Habatat, and I want to thank also the personal support that I've received from friends and family. You can't be an artist without that. So I just wanted to do some gratitude before we move forward. A little bit about myself is I study glass at U of I in Champaign. I've been working with glass for over 20 years. I live in Chicago, and I've been here for a while. And I also taught in CPS as part of, just to give you a little background on where some of this work may be coming from. There are moments where I just want to make sure that we're all coming from the same space in terms of definitions. So I want to talk about different things like bridges and shields. And so the definition for bridge is on the screen. It's something that's supported, but in Chicago, we use it to elevate our train system. And so that was the impetus for a lot of these pieces. And our train system, everything being elevated, mass transit is a way for us to come together. And so that was, for me, where kind of the work started. Let's see. So I originally started making this body of work that looked like rusted steel beams. And they started because my studio looked out on this beautiful velvety brown train bridge. And it was amazing. And it had all this age and all this character. And I was like, I'd like to create small installations that kind of incorporate that type of feeling, seeing how that's my natural landscape. And so I started out making these pieces that were cold assembled. This beam itself started out as plate glass that was sandblasted and then painted. And I started playing around with different ideas and imagery, but the idea really was that as glass artists, we're object makers. And so for me, I was always drawn to hot sculpting. And so these beams originally started out as a way for me to display my blown work, which were these sculpted pigeons. Oh, I'm frozen. Let's see. There we go. That'll work. All right. So following that introduction piece, I started being a little bit more verbal with the imagery that I was using. At the time that this piece was made, there was a lot of violence happening in Chicago, and my wife had just let me know that we were pregnant. And so we were really, really thinking about the idea of raising a son in the city that was, that's dealing with these high murder rates with predominantly children that are under the age of 21. And so this is where kind of this body grew from. And at this point, I moved away from making the pigeons because apparently people don't like living with pigeons. So I started making spray paint cans. And these early cans, or these early renditions of cans, came from like a cameo or a grawl technique. And so they all started out as being heavily sifted and then sandblasted through and being brought back up. Let's see. So from there, I moved into all of my pieces being slumped and fused. So all this is glass powders that creates this imagery. And I wanted to start building these smaller installations instead of one-off pieces. And so I started to think about the idea of installation, visual movement, and trying to engage the viewer for a longer period of time. Also, because all this glass was opaque, it was hard for the viewer to realize that there was glass, that it was glass. There were no clues that led it to that. And so I started to think about that in my transition. But the idea of Behind the Streets Are Watching was dealing with the credibility and respect of your peers, and what are you making? Like how is your work being perceived? Is it unique? Is it your own voice? And so I also adopted the color Celadon being my dominant color in the background because that was the color of our bridge structures. I was trying to be as true to nature as I possibly could with my environment. And so from there, I moved to this first piece of structural, I call the body of work structural integrity, but it's the first piece that I did with a clear section of glass. And there was a lot of experimenting with pattern and things along those lines. But the idea being that, I'm doing reverse sifting, which is kind of like an old technique that they used to do in like grocery stores. That's where I remember it first, is seeing the large windows in the front of the grocery stores, and they do their advertisements that were painted on instead of on paper or printed. And so I started thinking about that. But I really was trying to use the visual movement that an individual in my pieces were going to create by getting the viewer to see what he's seeing, to look down that set of lattice and try and see that view, what he's engaged in. So it's kind of where this work went. Again, these are all just kind of continuations. I should run through these a little bit faster because these older pieces, but the jubilation is another word for joy. Anybody that's a parent in this room understands seeing that child smile and experiencing that thing that they experienced for the first time. And so for me, it was about that. It was about that enjoyment of not only making unique work, but also showing it, sharing it with people, and then experiencing my outside life with my son and being a father. So we move into more work with my son's imagery. Apparently I have a focus or a muse. And so this piece, Excessive Noise, deals with multi-generations, where it's not only my son, but my father was actually a trumpet player in a big band. And I was lucky enough to have my parents live in a downstairs condo. So when I would come home from school, I'd spend time with my grandparents and have someone to watch us until my parents got back from work. And My grandfather was an amazing trumpet player. He was also one of the kindest people I ever met. So it was really nice for me to kind of have this thing. On the other side of that, because it's my son, we're dealing with the idea of him experiencing power for the first time and really being drawn into, you know, kind of flexing a little bit, making noise and doing things that kind of aren't always the most well-behaved, let's say. I also start to explore more of the idea of Easter eggs within my work, where I want my viewer to engage with all these different elements and views of things. So hopefully the more time that they spend with the work, the more things that they see. So these are just different details. It's a detail of the spray can. And the spray cans to me, I was trying to draw a parallel between social media and graffiti, where in a very short period of time, I can apply a lot of information and either take credit for it or not credit for it, and it can do a lot of good or a lot of bad. Again, all right, so here's another piece that's called Jackson Trigg. He is engaged and he's trying to get the viewer to look down and use visual movement throughout the piece to kind of draw him in. This piece was taken actually when I was doing a demonstration at Keith Clayton's, and my son was grasshopper hunting. So it was kind of fun to make work while I was making work. I'm starting to leave more and more clear in my pieces. Like if you notice this area here, I'm trying to allow the viewer to realize that these glass objects aren't exactly what they're seeing. They're glass, they're not steel. And so by using text within the work to discuss that, I'm also trying to draw them in and say, hey, what am I looking at? This was another example of my larger work. This is actually the biggest piece that I did, and it was at the Fort Wayne Museum for the Summer of Glass show. It's 4 feet wide by 5 feet high, and it's my rendition of The Wizard of Oz, where you're pulling back the curtain to see what reality really is. This piece, am I going too fast, Aaron? We doing okay?
You're doing great, buddy.
Okay. So this piece is titled Little Brother's Watching You Too, and the idea being that I'm trying to engage the viewer by having the imagery actively looking at the viewer. And so by using the binoculars, I'm trying to really draw them in, because what I found is people would normally, well, they wouldn't normally, if they didn't know what they were looking at, they'd process it shortly and then walk on. Whereas if you can get them to really understand, hey, this is not found object, this is actually hand created to look like found object, to trick you into thinking that it's found object, that's where you're ending up. And so, you know, another element of this is about questioning authority. So that's where we're at with this one. This is in a very important collection. It's called Waiting for Confirmation. And it's the first piece that, number one, I used white as the background. I make a transition from Celadon to white to make it more universal, because I don't need these structural elements just to be identified with from Chicago. They're also from, you know, a lot of urban industrialized cities have these elevated systems. So I wanted to kind of expand a little bit, but it's also the first piece that I use with two figures where there's an interaction. And I was starting to explore different ideas on how to engage the viewer in different ways. And so originally I created a video that went along with this, and we were going to try and do it augmented reality, and I just couldn't figure out the technology. So at some point we'll get there. But yeah, this piece actually is part of a like the video is the little girls watching the little boy draw the heart. And then at some point he hops down and they hug. It's really cute, if you can imagine it. So I'm going to talk about my process, just to share a little bit about what we do in case there are students that are watching the work or watching the video. But I want to, you know, I'm going to try and give enough details about what I'm making and how I make it that you can grasp it, but not enough details that you can knock it off. So the first part of the process is I use these these transparent films. And so I'll start out by cutting the original stencil and then spray that onto this transparent film then I will sift my background colors powder, whether it be Celadon or white or something else, onto the glass around this positive. And so here's an example of what it looks like without the positive and after it's been fired. From there, I'm going to flip the sheets over and I'm going to layer tons of smaller stencils that build up my background layers and my textures to really fill in that transparent area, and then that will get fired. So each of these pieces gets fired a minimum of 3 times. And so once we've got the information in the foreground and the background, it's time to address the edges. So it's just not 2 sheets of 12 by 24 glass. So I'm gonna start to distress and age the glass using diamond tools and diamond saws to actually carve the glass. And then from there I'll start to sift the layers of rust on it. So here's the edges kind of being shaped and carved slightly, and then this is it pre-fired. This is a different piece, which you'll see in a little bit. And so the panel on the right has been fired where the panel on the left has not. So you can see the difference between what happens in the kiln with the glass powders. Okay, so from there, I'm done with the flat sections of these pieces. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fuse sheets of white sheet glass. And from there, I'm going to age both sides of those and fire those twice. And then once those are fired as rectangles, I'm going to lay them across a V-shaped mold where the 2 outer edges are suspended. I'm going to bring it up to about 1300, 1350 degrees, and I press in the middle with a metal tool when it's at its highest temp to really force it into that right angle form. And so here are some examples of the spray cans. These are assembled hot, and I actually have a video of them on YouTube. If you do a Google search for me and like the Imagine Museum, you can see the process of me pressing those angle iron structures into the mold, but also me assembling these spray cans. And these start out as white cylinders that are pretty much like a cylindrical glass that you have at home. And I water slide these decals that we designed with glass pigments onto the outside, and then they're brought back up to temperature and then assembled the same way that goblets are. You bake a bunch of the parts and then you just assemble them quickly. So like I said earlier, there's a parallel that I'm trying to draw between the spray paint cans and social media, where, you know, you can be whoever you want on social media, and graffiti artists will leave their mark wherever they want at a time where hopefully they're able to be anonymous, or if they want to be known, they'll leave their tag there also. But that was kind of the idea behind the objects. And so this is the first piece that's being shown in this show, and it's called Not Listening. It is, it's actually one of the 2 most recent pieces that I've made. And it's about putting down the technology. It's about putting down the news, and it's just about trying to figure out what's important, you know, not listening to the outside noise and the outside arguments that everybody's having. And, you know, I also really identify with this image because my son has recently gotten into video games, and I need to engage him directly. Like, hey, stop playing, look at me. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. You want mac and cheese for dinner? Great. You know, and so that's kind of where this piece is coming from. And so I've got 2 details of it, just kind of showing the surface texture and the underlying colors. And so I always find it interesting how the patterns end up on the underside and how they line up with the stencil. So here's the other side of that coin, which is the second piece, which is called Tantrum. And it's about, it's about not having enough of the rules and people telling you what you need to do, and just being done with kind of hearing all these things that people are like, oh, you've got to be this way. And so, I could see these two pieces being side by side, and it'd be a really interesting installation. But that wasn't the natural intent. So again, we've got some details. All right, and so there was a transitional phase between my structural integrity work where I was trying to explore different ways how to weave my new work into existence. And so, as all artists do, we start to take chances and start to explore different things and say, okay, yes, this worked, no, this didn't. But yeah, that's kind of where we're going from here. And so, I would say 3 or 4 years ago, I increased the scale of my normal spray cans. And so these are over 2 feet tall. And the idea, I'm trying to explore kind of that idea of making a pop culture item and dealing with pop culture imagery. So the mask on these pieces is taken from a Guy Fawkes, who in the 1600s rebelled against a government in Europe, blew up Parliament actually. And the ring that goes around the mask is it's from Versace. And so it's dealing with the idea of vanity and excess and wealth and beauty. And because the objects are larger than life, I'm trying to take kind of a John Miller approach by making them to that scale to show their importance. And these spray cans are different than the smaller spray cans because of the larger spray cans on the back have a general warning. But just like a spray can that you would get from the hardware store, but these talk about the value of art and how art enriches your life and how these things will bring enjoyment and will start conversations. And instead of, these are supposed to be mass consumed versus done in different ways. And so just trying to be tongue in cheek, but also putting that text on there for those that are willing to spend the amount of time with the work that they hopefully demand. All right. So from here, the grass is greener. This piece was inspired by international travel. In reality, my wife and I have done a lot of traveling, and so oftentimes we will go to places where our dollar goes a lot farther than it does in the U.S. And so, you go to these areas where, people have a lot less. Their houses are built, they're shanties. They're built out of corrugated steel or plywood and things along those lines. And they're just barriers to keep them safe from the weather. And yet they seem so much happier without that level of excess that we search for, that we strive for through, the objects that we collect or the life that we try to represent on social media and things along those lines. And so the idea behind this finding kind of value in lesser things and realizing that not everybody's life is the same, but also really kind of moving into the ideas like this work is probably 2 or 3 years old. So we were dealing with major immigration issues in our news. It seemed like we were plagued by that conversation. And so these walls and these barriers are kind of me dealing with it in that sense. And everything is handmade in this object. The barbed wire, I'm made out of copper and then electroplated with brass. But I want to incorporate these other elements to make it perceived to be the top of a wall. And the idea of the young man gazing over what would be the fence to see what it's like on the other side is there. And that, this shanty object, by using the UNESCO logo in it, which is the United Nations Educational Science Cultural Fund, is usually areas that are saved and preserved. And so to have that on this scrap of wall is kind of trying to be tongue in cheek and just engage the viewer a little bit further, saying, hey, is this worth saving? So from there, I moved to a piece called You Name the Place. And it's trying to deal with the idea of teaching through games, gamification, and learning through play. And so I try to make a transition from one side to the other in terms of visual materials, where I try to make the left side of the image look like plywood. And as it made a transition across, it ended up on a clear backboard that you would see in either professional league or college or even high school. And the left side of the rim has been yanked down and pulled down because that's normally what happens in backyard games. You know, the hoop isn't at regulation, so kids are hanging on it all day and bending things. And, you know, to me, basketball was the game that we went to as kids. You know, it required very little. If you could find a usable hoop and you had a ball, you were ready to go. And you could do it by yourself. You didn't need a team to play it. So that's how this kind of made that transition. From there, I made this piece called Echoes, which was in the Click It show that was put on through the WGS Gallery. Shout out to Michael Janis and Tim Tate. But the work is really about having a platform to speak for not just yourself, but for others, because sometimes those others can't speak. And so by making the soapbox is the platform itself, but the idea of the clear blown glass megaphone, it has like a ghost-like feeling because it's made out of clear. And so your actions then are what is remembered on that event. And so this was made last summer when there were a lot of protests, and there were a lot of issues dealing with equal rights and fair treatments. And so, you know, I was trying to speak up on behalf of support of others. So that's how this piece came together. Okay. Things are going to get a little heavy here for a second, but I promise we'll lighten back up. So this upcoming work, I'm making a series of riot shields. Riot shields aren't, you know, it's not a tool that the police use all the time. It's normally, they come into play when we have major divides in issues and perspective. And so what I'd like this work to be perceived as is a willingness to put down those shields and really start to listen from the other side and try and understand with a sense of empathy. But for me, it's really about working towards our future generation and leaving our planet as a better place for kids and dealing with equality for all Americans based on ethnicity, religion, sexual preference, identity, things along those lines. And coming together in a sense of civility. But the work is not about us as individuals, it's about us as collectives coming together as a culture. So I also need to state what the work is not about. So I need to talk about intent versus perception. And so these are not anti-police by any means. Many of my neighbors are police officers. One of my closest friends from middle school is a lieutenant of the police department in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And he has the night shift. So during his shift, his word matters more than the mayor of Kenosha. And so, you know, I'm all for protecting everybody, and I'm trying to be as pro-rights as I can through this. I don't want to be polarizing through any sense of it. So again, I want to define what a shield is. It's pretty much an object to protect you, but to me, the verb is more important because it's to protect. I am using the imagery in these pieces and the idea behind these to hopefully help others and protect them. And so for me, the reality sets in with my son. And so this is a digital image of a screen that I have made that I haven't been able to finish. It was supposed to be ready for this show, but it wasn't able to happen. And so a little bit about me was I went to school in the middle of an urban environment where there was a ghetto that was very close by, but also there was a performing arts school and a gifted program at the same school. And so it was this mishmash of different cultures, different demographics, different financial incomes, and you start to grasp what the world looks like through others' eyes by experiencing it in that sort of way. And then so from there, I also had, my college experience. If you look at pictures of me from college, it pretty much looks like a Benetton ad, where I have a very, very diverse swath of friends, whether it be Latino or Asian or African American. My original roommate was from Nigeria. And so, as you spend time with those groups of people, they're not different. We are all connected. And so to me, I'm trying to deal with the idea of unity throughout my work. And so as I move towards this image, I'm also part of a multicultural marriage. My son is Asian. And so, I don't want him to be treated differently because of how he looks. And I know it's someday I'm going to have that conversation with him about, hey, people are not going to like you, not because of anything you did, solely because of how you looked. And it's a difficult conversation because, it's something that I never had to experience. And so I'm experiencing it for the first time through my son. And so that's where a lot of the idea and the support through this work kind of came from. And so I am, being a white male, I am attempting to champion the efforts and speak up on behalf of those that look different or have been treated differently because they may not have that voice. And so it's interesting because we moved to our house in the middle of the pandemic. And so I didn't have a studio set up, and we were working through this stuff. And I'm having a phone call with a very close friend of mine, and the protests are happening. There's been 2 people that have died due to the hands of police officers. And, I had told him about the dreams to make this work. And he's like, you need to get out of your pool and start making this work. He's like, you can't sit through this. And so kind of here's where we were, we pushed through. And so I'm going to talk about my process first before I get into the work, because I think that it makes more sense this way. And so this is my son, and my first step of the process is to start with a model or a digital collage of what I'm trying to draw. I'll work through that. And then from there, I'll draw it on a tablet using a program called, what is this called? Procreate, creatively titled Procreate. And so I'll do a digital drawing and I'll strip out each layer of information and give it its own layer. And so here's an image of that. And so what I'll do is each of those images, then I get printed large scale on transparencies, because that's how silk screens are made. And so here's an example of the film of the silk screen following it being burned. And so you put they put an emulsion on it, and then they expose it to light, and then anything that's not covered with black stays, and everything that's not gets washed away. And so the screen, these are really large screens. This screen is 44 inches by 32 inches. Okay, and so following the technical process of attempting to put the image onto the pieces, you have to deal with the object himself. And so the cutting of polishing of double thick glass is not always an easy thing, and you have to grind it through very, very high grits to make it look clean. And so this has been fired once, where the police label is on the background, but the reason it's there is to help identify what the object is. Again, I need to clarify that these are not anti-police pieces. These are not pro-riot pieces. They're about narrative. And so that police band there is solely there to lend you to believe that these objects are actual riot shields. And so once it's been fired, you silk screen each layer by laying that screen on it and pulling enamels through it. And each layer of information needs to dry for 24 to 48 hours. And so this is 3 layers of information. This is 4 layers of information. And then this is 5 layers of information. And so I wanted to introduce the idea of, I needed to fill the background with something else. You know, I couldn't just have the image of the individual on it. And so by using the idea of it being either smoke or tear gas, or, you know, the passion, but like the fires of passion, like visualized, I needed something else to happen in the background. And so this is it before it's been fired. And then each of these pieces is hand touched up and embellished, because sometimes when you're silk screening, as you apply a wet material to a dry material, it'll pull it back up on the back of the screen. And so everything is unique and touched up. This is what it looks like. This is what the kiln looks like before it gets fired. I had to fabricate or get a piece of stainless steel fabricated to create my mold. These are the hanging apparatus and the background elements to kind of continue to create the illusion that this is actual riot shield. And it's part of being an artist is finding either things that work to help create your illusion or creating them yourself. And so there are hours worth of research trying to find the right things to make it look like this is the back of a riot shield. You can't go to a store or a police station and say, hey, do you have any leftover riot shield stuff? And so here is an image of the finished piece with the hardware attached. So that's the process. And I also needed to share, this is kind of like the fail reel, where you need to understand that things break, and that as artists, we learn from our mistakes. So not every attempt is a make. So all of my details are underneath people, but it's funny. So this piece is titled Malia's Drive. And this is the first piece of this body of work in the Coming Together show. And like I said earlier, this piece is also on display during the Habitat 50th Invitational. So if you're going to make it there, you can see it in person. But like I said earlier, last summer, there were a number of events where protests happened due to loss of life. And so I wanted to use these objects as historical markers to kind of mark the events, but also provide insight in how we as humans got through them. And so due to the news giving us this back-to-back information about the protests and the riots that are happening in our cities, you start to doom scroll and find out more information about why these things are happening. And through that, I end up looking through images to see if I know anyone. So I come across this image online of this woman, Malia, and I contacted her because I felt like it was really important. Like I couldn't get past the image, the actual image. It was just so unbelievably strong. She was confident. And so I reached out to her and had a conversation with her about it. She gave me the rights to use her likeness in my work. But it was amazing to hear her story and her struggles that she was going through and what these sorts of movements mean to her. And so I wanted to try and capture that, not just from my work, but to honor her through this work. So here's a detail of it. The next piece is titled Fighting for Equality. And so to me, I try to lace my work full of imagery that has symbols. And so I'm using the American flag in this sense as a symbol for our rights. At the same time these protests were happening last summer, we also have rights or laws being passed that are making it more difficult for predominantly African Americans to vote. And so I'm trying to engage that level of intellect into this work. I also positioned, so the imagery within the object is me and my roommate from college. I've known him for 25 years. He's one of my closest friends. I love him. He's been a brother through all of it, you know? And the thing is we've been through experiences where he and I have been together. Nothing was different outside of our skin tone, and yet he was treated completely different. And that it was important for me to kind of have that narrative and show that within the work. And then that's why I'm in behind him in this piece. I am helping him through his struggle. And so also by using a minority in this image as the dominant figure because he's centered, it also speaks to me. I'm trying to engage not just African Americans, but all minority groups. Again, based on whether you be female, whether you be gay, lesbian, LGBTQ, Asian American, they're all fighting against the same fight, which is to be treated exactly the same. And so this is about diversity and inclusion. And so there's a couple details here of this piece. But I'm really trying to capture the struggle. The next piece is called Courage Under Pressure. I have a different one behind me on my wall, which I'll give you a close-up of later on. The piece was during a protest that took place in Louisville directly following the Breonna Taylor protest. And what had happened was this officer, his name is Officer Hinshaw, he was isolated. He lost track of the rest of his unit. And so he's walking through the streets, and the streets are starting to engage him. And there's 5 men that stand around him and back him into the wall and protect him from the crowd, because at this point the crowd is shouting, "All gas, no brakes." And so, you know, I found it really interesting where the protesters that protected him may not have received that same level of restraint from the officers during their peaceful protest. And so, again, these pieces are supposed to be historic markers that are documenting events. And so here's a detail and another one. And this piece as well is at Habitat for the 50th. Here's another image of it, just with slightly different colors. All right, so this piece is titled Mourning, and it's intended to convey a loss and a moment of awareness. You know, the flag, again, to me, I'm using it as a representational object to deal with rights, values, liberties, civility, empathy, you know, and during this time, it was just all these images were created last year. So this is the first of the pieces that I've shown that has a single screen. So it only has one layer that is silk screen on top, but all of the underlying levels, excuse me, and imagery or colors are hand applied with a palette knife. And I was trying to capture or evoke like a level of eeriness throughout it. And I was trying to use a palette similar to Degas, where, you know, there are eerie tones and the lighting really shows kind of an awkward element to it. And so I've got a couple details of this. I tried to be ambiguous with the facial structure, not doing too much that leads you to believe that that's one ethnicity or another. This man could be Hispanic, Caucasian, African American, but the reality is it's mourning the civility, and through having for me, there was a real divide that happened over the last couple of years where we're communicating as individuals, like especially with my family, because we don't always agree politically. And so it comes out where you're just not even able to have that conversation. And so it's your party did this and your party did this and you're this, and it's not engaging. It doesn't bring anybody together, and it just makes us sad that this is part of our environment. All right, so now I'm moving into some lighter pieces. This piece is titled Overcoming Barriers. It's about working together and coming through obstacles. And so I'm using a diverse group of people in my imagery, in this sense, where it's men, women, it's multi-ethnic. You'll see in the details that the woman has Asian features, and the man that's standing to help the other individual over the wall has African American features. And so to me, it's about an education. It's about trying to grasp this and understanding it from others' perspectives. And so the last two pieces are the shields that include my son Jex. And so the first is titled From the Mouths of Babes. It is it's intended to engage the viewer in a way because he's making eye contact with you. But he's also holding up a protest sign, which is asking the viewer to change their perspective or try to see things from another side or another angle. And also by putting a child on a riot shield, it's asking, at what age does a child go from being cute and warm and cuddly to becoming a man or a threat or, something else? And so I also tried to write the text on his sign in a attempting to make it like an elementary penmanship. So it looks like it's actually his message, because for me, using imagery of your son at some point it's autobiographical, because he's part me. And so that's kind of where these pieces are coming from. The last piece is titled Enough, and it's similar to the prior shield, where it's asking people to stop and try and come together. I can remember experiences being in rooms with adults where they're arguing, and you as a child don't know how to deal with it. And so it's really just trying to get them to stop, listen to each other, and to work through their problems. And so I've got a detail of this, and then this ends my slide presentation. So I'd like to thank everybody and open this up for questions.
Thank you, Joe, so much. Will you go ahead and stop sharing your screen? That would be great and perfect. And so you mentioned earlier about people not seeing your details. People control their own views of how they see people. So worry not about that. So let me switch off to gallery view on my screen. Well, that was incredible. It goes to show what a talent you are and a visionary you are, and pushing the medium of glass in a direction I've never seen anybody else do in my lifetime. And I love these works. I think they're impressive, and just your stories about each one have an emotional pull for each of us as an individual, for what's going on in the world and all sides of the planet. So thank you again for being here. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask or unmute yourself about the works. Like Joe said, 2 of them are on display in the gallery for the upcoming Habitat 50th presentation. You can see obviously some of them on the Glass Art Fair, and obviously more importantly on his individual show on artsy.net. I pasted a link into the show to see these works. Joe, I wanted to ask you, since you showed us the backside, how do these actually mount to the wall, these actual pieces, once you have them at home?
So there's a vertical orientation, then there's a landscape orientation. The landscape orientation, can you guys see?
Yeah. Mark you as a speaker or pin you.
So there are just 2 clips that attach to the handle on the back side of the piece.
Uh-huh.
And so
Mounts through that. Gotcha. Easy does it.
very easy.
And you had another.
Joseph,
Yeah.
the little black circles look like bolts. What are those? On
They are
the-
bolts. The black circles in the foreground, these are
Yeah.
bolts. They hold the handle and the strap to the back of the piece.
So they're mounted through the glass itself as
Yeah.
if it was a real shield held by a police officer or somebody who would, in the military, who would hold the shield. So imagine you have a drawer handle in a drawer and you're opening the drawer up. It's the exact same thing. The handle's mounted through the drawer and screwed on the other side. So you're actually looking at bolts and it's adding to the appearance of the full shield. Is that right, Joe?
Absolutely. That was a better description than I would have given.
No problem. And they are, designed as realistically as possible to be in the riot shield, as Joe mentioned. So, yeah, very cool. Amazing coloring and details. And I've loved seeing the progression. And I'll personally be talking to you more about these because I think they're fantastic. And I think they really open up a whole new world of people who will appreciate, besides your art, the medium of glass used in this style. So thank you again for being here. Everybody, you're welcome to unmute yourself and say goodbye. And like I said, we have these at the gallery. Yeah.
Genevieve, do you have a question?
I do, but I think Anne has been waiting. I've seen her.
Okay.
Oh, sure. And go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I want to just tell you I'm blown away, Joe. I'm blown away with what you've done. It's fabulous. Somebody answered my question about how you hang them. But for example, the piece not listening, what kind of weight are we talking about? 10
The pieces
pounds?
are, yeah, they're probably 10 to 15 pounds.
Okay. I want to make sure it doesn't pull down a wall when I call you to buy something.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, it's not going to pull your wall down. It's just a
I have to
couple
say
anchors.
hello also to Danny, who I haven't seen in 40 years. I don't know if you remember me, but how are you? Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for your question. Genevieve, you have something to say too?
Yeah. I just, a couple of things. First, I really appreciate your explanations, or not explanations, but your talk about this, Joe, because you give the background, but it's really nice because you leave us open to interpret it too and have a viewer experience of our own. So I really appreciate that because I think it's nice to be able to look at something and hear what it's about, but also then bring my own perspective to it. But so my question is, and maybe you answered this, I just love how there's that tension and there's that energy in the pieces when they're pulling. And so how do you accomplish that? Are you drawing first? Or, so I don't know if you know what I'm saying is, it's
Sure.
amazing to me that you get that on the glass, but I just wanted to hear you explain about how you get that. I feel that energy. I feel that tension. It's like, it's really moving. I can, I obviously it's static in terms of the piece, but you can look at it and you feel what's happening. So I just wanted to know how you achieve that.
So yeah, I normally start with a concept and then I sketch out the concept, and then from there I'll either create a collage or from found images, or I always work from a source. And so I went over to Calvin's house and we did a tug of war with a flag, and then I started distressing and fraying the edge of the flag, So
Yeah. Well, I think it's outstanding. Really solid work.
Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Myra Weiss talking. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Myra.
We are the very, very happy owners of your Waiting for Confirmation. And it's from your earlier series, but your humanity and kindness and warmth just spoke to us when we saw the piece. And
thank you.
So thank you very much.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and thanks for your comments, everybody. And I'm looking forward to seeing these works live and in person. You're invited to come see them. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me anytime. And I'm looking forward to, as this body of work continues to be sharing more of these images with you in the future. Joe,
Aaron.
Yeah.
If you want to end the video, I'll do Q&A afterwards as well.
Sure. So we'll wrap up the recording right now, and thank you for joining us. If you have seen this on YouTube, feel free to like, subscribe, and hit this bell, and make sure to share with everybody you know and love.